next I'd like to introduce Michael Rosanova. And he's going to talk to us about his book, Big Brains and Broken Hearts. And I think he's specifically looking at a section called Looking for Baby Jesus. Michael is both an author and professor of psychology and sociology at Triton College. And his book is brand new, published March of 2025. It is a freshie by Casa Italia. This is a unique and imaginative book that includes memoir, magical realism, nonfiction, beautiful images, and more. His work is a result of his participation in a guided autobiography program through Dominican University. And we were talking about, about groups and about ways of joining with other people that get that writing to start coming out of you. So this is a wonderful example of something that's just emerged in that way. It really underscores the way a writer's community, beginning right where you are, can create such a treasure trove. So I'm saying the same thing I wrote down, which means it's true, right? So welcome and thank you.
My students at Triton had a very difficult time saying anything other than, hey. They would say, hey, instead of saying, Dr. Rosanova. And, a PhD does include the letter D, the same as MD. And so you're a doctor, I'm sorry. And I always told the students, if you scrape your knee, don't come to me. I'm not that kind of doctor, okay? But my father was that kind of doctor, and I had a sister and two brothers who also became that kind of doctor, and it was expected. But I didn't do it, okay? And Big Brains and Broken Hearts is about how I didn't do it, okay? I thought it was an interesting story, and so when I was invited to help out with that course for aspiring social workers at Dominican, I thought I was being invited to stand up at something like this and lecture. I wasn't. I was invited to be one of the specimens. And in the meantime, I totally agreed with Judy Bach, who was the teacher for that course. She was trying to teach her students what it means to be old, because they didn't know, right? And Julie said this at the very first meeting. She said, when I started teaching gerontology, I was too young to understand what I was doing. Because in order to understand, you need to be able to look at the road behind you and understand that's much longer than the road ahead. And there needs to be a change in perspective, okay? In a similar way, when I took that course, or helped as a specimen in that course, one of the ladies in the course, a little old lady, and now I can say little old lady because I'm a little old man, but a little old lady in the course, living in lovely river forest in the great leisure and pleasure of successful financial planning, okay? She said, there's something called story worth a story. And my kids signed it up. sign me up for it. It's an app. And once you get signed up, they keep on sending you prompts every week, with a long series of possible topics for you to write about. And that's really helpful. It's a really good, because, you know, when you write, the people who are chosen as possible readers, you don't want to choose people who are going to ridicule you or make fun of you or whatever. But her kids, basically, and some of her close friends were on that list of readers, right? And she said, I've never had so much fun in my life. You could too, by the way. Because, you know, as Christina pointed out in her opening remarks, everybody's got a story. And, you know, some people are lucky enough to be the heroes of their life stories. That could be you. But if you don't write, and if you don't think about such things, it's not going to happen. You know, people will attend your funeral, they'll listen to the priest that never really got to know you. He won't have much to say. People will bless themselves. People will take their prayer cards. You weren't really there. So, I agree with Christina. Sit down and write something. And discuss it with some of your friends, people that you're not afraid of. Okay? And so for this reason, I more or less tricked my kids into buying a subscription to that app. Okay? $100, well spent. Okay? And they've never complained. So, in any case, in the stories that I wrote, what I noticed about my life was rooted in my teaching. You know, I had taught both sociology and psychology. I loved developmental psychology. I ran a Montessori school, which I founded, you know, with my wife, and we found out lots of stuff that we never would have imagined. Okay, in my teaching in sociology, I would often quote a work by a French sociologist whose name was Marcel Mauss, M-A-U-S-S. Okay? He published a famous essay in 1925 called Essai sur le don, which means an essay on the giving of gifts. That's what inspired the story that I'm about to read you. Okay? I'm not going to give you the anthropological theory. I'm not going to, you know, explain any of the technical details, because that's not how a symphony is written. Okay? A symphony is different from other forms of music because it moves from emotion to emotion. That's Brahms. Okay? It moves from emotion to emotion. It does not move from statistics to statistics. It moves in a way that moves people. And guess what? That's what I was after with my stories. Okay. This story is called Looking for the Baby Jesus. And you can hear some of the themes, you know, between the lines. You can hear some of the themes, and, you know, when we get to the question and answer, I want you to ask some of the questions. But you can hear some of the themes that we just heard about in the formal sociological work on the phenomenon of hope and the transformation of identity. Okay. All right. Long, long ago, and far, far away, a big music box made music. If you cranked the handle, Grace danced. Grace was 7. They didn't call her Grace back then. They called her Grazia. Next. How long will we be on that boat? Mama, that ship. Grazia, you help with your little brother. Rock him asleep. D'accordo, Mama, but the boat, she's already rocking. Racconta, Grazia, un racconto. Non ne conosci. Don't you know a story? The story of the Befana. Befana was a witch. Back home in the mountains, far away from this ship, this city, all these people, Befana wore a shawl on her shoulders and a scarf on her head. Because it gets cold in the mountains, it snows. Befana was old and ugly with just one tooth. It was a gold one. You could see it when she talked, but you had to be careful about what she said. She was quick, she was tricky. Gee, was she telling the truth? She liked to listen for people's secrets so she could tell on them and laugh. She liked to sweep up in front of her house and listen to the people passing by. One day, 3 strange-looking men were riding by on camels. Camels in Italy. All 3 had funny hats, maybe crowns made out of gold. They saw Befana sweeping. They asked her about directions. We 3 kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we travel afar. Field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of night, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light. Aha, thought Befana. Not from around here. Not very smart, she thought. They sounded funny. Their Italian really wasn't very good. We want to find the newborn king, they said. We have gifts for the newborn baby, the newborn king, they said. Go this way, go that way, go left, go right, go up, go down, then turn around, said Befana. Befana did not want them to get to the newborn king very quickly. Befana had a plan. Befana wanted to bring that baby gifts of her own. Befana wanted to make that baby give gifts back to her. One hand washes the other, she thought. You give, you get back, she thought. Even a little baby king could give Befana lots and lots of gifts, she thought. He's a baby, but he's a king, she thought. Those 3 kings don't need any gifts, she thought. Let them all take the crowns off their heads, she thought. So when the 3 kings set off on all the wrong roads, Befana grabbed a big, big bag of gifts, out of her basement, out of her attic, out of the shed, by her garden door. She jumped on her magic broom. She flew up into the starry night. But God saw her dark and tricky heart. And God pulled a trick on her, because God knew it served her right. No one can find the baby Jesus without a good, true heart, God said. No tricky hearts allowed. And then God said, we will remember the night when the three kings really did find the baby Jesus. We will call it the Feast of the Three Kings, Epiphany. And the night before the feast, God said, Befana can fly through the night looking for the baby Jesus. She can fly every year for all the rest of time, and let her ask every sleeping boy and every sleeping girl, are you the baby Jesus? Every sleeping boy and girl. And then Grazia gave her little brother a warning. When La Befana comes to visit, don't wake up. Befana is a tricky witch, but she's not very smart. So if you don't wake up and you don't tell her who you really, really are, she always leaves a gift. She leaves a gift just to see whether she can get rich. That's the story that Grazia told her little brother. Grazia was 7 years old. And then little Grazia got on that big ship with her mom and her baby brother. But she did not forget her stories. Even after she got to America, even after people started calling her Grace, Gracie, Grace. And then she grew up and had 2 girls of her own. And then those 2 girls grew up and had kids of their own. And then one day, when I asked her about the time before she was called Grace, I asked her, Mama Gay, Grandma Grace, do you remember any stories from long ago, far away, from somewhere in the mountains of Italy? She had gotten very old. Her hair was very white. Her voice had gotten very weak. And that was when she told me about Befana. She told me about what La Befana did on the night before the 3 kings found the baby Jesus. I don't think that anybody else was listening. Okay, these are based on exchanges, and this is one of the real exchanges that came back to me via my app. Okay. Larry Baldacci wrote me this. Michael, I love this story and the recounting of La Befana. I knew some of the legend, but not all of it. Thanks for filling in the missing links. Ray, Larry's husband, Ray and I have a tiny wooden ornament of La Befana that my mother had. She gave it to us. It sits in a place of honor near our Christmas tree. Buon Natale, Mike. See you in the new year. Larry. And then another friend, a friend from St. Giles by the name of Mary, wrote, what a wonderful story, Mike. Thanks for sharing it. This is my reply. I think I mentioned in another story that my father had evening hours at his office in the 3 flat at 1629 North Central Avenue, a few doors up from North Avenue in Chicago. His patients were mostly lower middle and working class people, mostly either the children of immigrants or the immigrants themselves, mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe. People who lived in Austin in the 1950s were proud that they had moved up a rung or two on the social ladder from more desperate areas of the city. Even after Austin became part of the West Side ghetto, the housing stock itself was sturdier and more stable looking than what people had left behind when they could. My father's evening hours fit the possibilities of people who worked in shops and factories, and few of them looked down on him. I was amazed at my father's wake to hear patient after patient tell me that my father was extraordinary, a humanitarian, a genius. Growing up in upper middle class Oak Park, in a predominantly lace-curtain Irish Catholic parish, I had never had that impression. Those evening office hours meant that dinner had to be on the kitchen table, piping hot, with the entire family, all 6 kids, Mama Gay, my grandmother, Gags, and my mother, all arrayed around the table when my father appeared at the kitchen door, 5:30 p.m., and not a moment later. If it had not been for my father, none of the rest of us would have been there in the glory of Oak Park. My father was a remarkably successful student, who began life on Taylor Street, up a couple doors on Miller Street, actually, from Taylor Street, when it was considered a dangerous area. He was a remarkably successful breadwinner. We all knew it. We all knew that we depended on him. Keeping a tight schedule might be second nature to lots of people of lots of different backgrounds, but you have to remember that it took a world historical tyrant, Benito Mussolini, to make the trains run on time when he was in charge of Italy. And you need to think of Fellini's heroines, people in real life like Anna Magnani or Giulietta Mazzina, to remember that Italian women, like Italians in general, are not often simple doormats. I can't say that the kitchen at 1201 North Linden Avenue was never the scene of high drama, but I will remind you that pasta never cooks in water that does not boil. Can't you kids stop throwing around the cushions in the front row? Can't there be just one room in this house where everything always looks nice? And the covers in the bedrooms looked all smooth and nice just a few hours ago. Why do you kids have to go jumping on the beds? Often enough, I would observe Mama Gay, my grandmother, raising her shoulders in a theatrical Italian shrug, saying to no one in particular, "Someday they will miss me." She was in her 50s at that time, but she said it often enough in the decades that followed, often enough that I will never forget it. At the age of 75 myself these days, I often think of her frustration and her kindness, how totally sincere and totally contrary to the mind of La Befana, the life that she shared with us really was. And despite my many years of Catholic education and Catholic this and that, I can't really say I put much credence in the stories of a life beyond death, where we all meet again, transformed, perfected, no one bearing any grudges. Not long before she died, Mama Gay asked me, as though I were some sort of authority, whether there is a heaven or a hell. "That's all right here while you're living," she said. And the best I could do was to lower my eyes and offer a big Italian shrug. But I hope that what was going through her mind was some consolation to her. her steadfast conviction that someday we would miss her. Because in that I can tell you with total confidence, she was absolutely right. All right, questions?
We have got time for maybe one question.
Michael, I'd like you to share your experience after you got your manuscript ready and getting your book to print.
Okay, my experience was this, and I think that it would be your experience as well if you go through the same journey, you know, or a similar one. Okay? I called my kids who live out in California in the glory of Pasadena. Okay? And I said to them, kids, when I kick the bucket, you can throw the ashes down the toilet. I don't care. Keep this book. That's it.